My mother was born in Richland Center, Wisconsin, and my dad was, I don't know where he was born, somewhere in Chicago. And, my mother was a devout Methodist, and my dad was, I believe, an atheist. I never heard him say one word or another about for or against religion. And, but I never saw him go to church either. So, so that's, I don't know very much about them, about either my mother or my father. Oh, well, I visited Richland Center a great many times as a kid, and you know, all of my, my mother's family was up there, and I had a lot of fun up there. And but my memories of that are getting very dim, and no one that up there is alive now. I probably wouldn't know a person in town. Yeah, you know what? Bertrand Russell has a kind of a parable of sorts. He says, you look behind you at life, and there's all kinds of people in line behind you. Then you look again, and one of them is missing. And then you look again, and another is missing, and they slowly disappear person by person until there's nobody left there. And that's where we wind up at the age of 94. I look around, and I'm happy to have a few younger friends, such as yourself and my friend Larry and my sons and my daughter. But other than that, almost United Airlines only knows who I am because they have to send me a pension check every month. So that's very much appreciated. My mother was, I think, was German, Irish, and so forth, and my dad was Danish. And my dad served in World War I in the field artillery, and I guess he saw some action in France, but he survived without injury. Oh.
Dave, you should pull down your mask. Do you really need it on?
No, I don't really. I'm fully vaccinated,
Yeah,
and I
ahead,
assume
take it
you
off.
are too. Yeah, I don't need
Oh,
the.
yeah.
Yeah, I don't need that.
Dave, I'm vaccinated. I mean, people I know who, understand the value of medical science and have the opportunity to be vaccinated are vaccinated. So,
I do not understand why so many people refuse. States like Mississippi and so forth, they have a large number of people that just would refuse to be vaccinated. And they have a large number of people dying, so they don't seem to get the message.
very sad. Now, you mentioned your dad was in World War One.
Yes.
Did he talk about that much as in terms of where he was and what he did?
No. A nephew of mine, for some reason, has some of my dad's military records, which he has showed me from time to time. But how he happened to come about them, I don't really know. So, well, as I pointed out to you, Ted, I cannot really imagine what my life would have any great amount of interest for anybody else. So you'll just have to prompt me with questions on that you think might be pertinent.
And Dave, yes, indeed, I will. When you were growing up, then, did your parents move here to Racine? Did you grow up in Racine?
Well, as I said, my mother grew up in Richland Center, and my dad pretty much grew up in North Chicago or Racine, and so
Did they move up here? Were you born here then in Racine?
myself,
Yeah.
I was born in Richland Center, but
Oh, you were, and then they
but
moved over here.
that was simply because there was a doctor in the family, in the Richland Center branch, my mother's family, and he offered to deliver me if my mother could make it up to Richland Center. So she managed to make it up to Richland Center, and where I was born on August the 3rd, 1926, a day that will go down in history, no doubt, in Richland Center, Wisconsin.
And then they moved over here eventually, or were they living here already?
They were living here already.
And what did your dad do, Dave?
He was trained as a barber, but my dad did not like to work, so he seldom did. So we grew up on what is known as welfare today. It was known as relief in those days. I grew up during the Great Depression, and we didn't really suffer any want. I will say that the Racine Welfare Department took very good care of us. We always lived in a perfectly respectable house, several different homes, but that was it. I had a lot of fun in Racine growing up. Didn't really suffer any. I never knew what it was to go hungry or anything like that.
Did your mother work then too, or did she make a living?
She was a waitress at various working men's style restaurants, and she cleaned other people's houses. And her and my dad argued a good deal. I can remember it because, as I said, he didn't want to work, but he was a smoker, but he wasn't a heavy smoker because he couldn't afford it. But he and my mother would argue, and my dad would stalk out of the house and go down to the VFW club. And of course, in those days, everyone smoked, and so anytime they would take out a pack of cigarettes, they'd offer one to my dad, and so he managed to get his daily quota of nicotine, I think.
Dave, where did you get? I mean, you obviously had an intense work ethic. Where did you get that from? If you're not from your dad, your mom, or just did you have it innately?
When I was a kid, we used to be scavengers. We'd go to the city dump, and my younger brother and I, and we'd scavenge scrap metal, this, that, and the other thing, and take it to the nearest scrap yard and get a few pennies for it. And then later on, I had a paper route, and managed, that was a pretty good paying job by my standards. I always gave my mother a buck or two of what we'd settle up our accounts on Saturday morning, and so it was a good job for a kid.
Dave, of course, the Frank Lloyd Wright buildings, Johnson Wax,
Yeah.
the Wax Works. Did you have any interactions with that when you were growing up in Racine? Did you ever get over there?
Not the research tower. It hadn't been built yet. I don't remember what year that was built, but I lived for several years on South Racine Street, and it was just a short walk down to the main Johnson Wax plant at that time. they also had a paint business. They manufactured paint way back then, and that was on about 14th Street in Racine, and no. And of course, Lake Michigan in the summertime supplied most of our recreation. We practically lived on the shore.
Did you swim in Lake Michigan?
Oh yeah, oh
How'd
sure.
how'd you do that with it's so cold?
Well, we didn't seem to mind it at the time. We'd swim mostly from 14th Street Beach, and there was a breakwater out on, I estimate about 300 yards offshore, and the breakwater consisted of huge slabs of rock, you know, and we'd go out there and swim out there and sunbathe, and sometimes late in the afternoon, and then when the sun started going down, things started getting chilly. Then we had to get back in the cold water and swim back to shore. So we had a lot of fun.
And now, Dave, so then, of course, you went to high school, graduated, and
No, I did not.
you didn't graduate.
No,
You never got a high school diploma.
I got a high school diploma when I was discharged from the Navy. They gave me a high school diploma.
So how did you wind up joining the Navy then?
Well, I would have graduated from, if I had graduated from high school, it would have been, well, I was sworn into the Navy 2 days after my 17th birthday, which was August 3rd, 1943. And so of course, I did not actually go to high school. I skipped school a whole bunch. And if I went to the pool room, they would find me. So I found the perfect hideout for truants, which was the public library. So I would go to the public library, and the head librarian at the time was an old maid, a nice old maid by the name of Miss Parham. And she would see me come in, and all I had was a children's card, so I didn't even bother to go to, so I just would disappear into the stacks and plop down in a corner somewhere and find a book in the stack, which was how I ran across H.L. Mencken and Bertrand Russell, perhaps, and numerous other authors. And, other than that.
Well, so Dave, you joined the Navy then in 1943.
Yeah.
And what happened? I mean, what motivated you to join the Navy instead of the Army or the Air Force or something?
Well, I wouldn't have been eligible for the Air Force without or the Army Air Force without a high school diploma. So I would, the only thing I would have been able to join would be the Army, the infantry, and in which case I probably wouldn't have made it till today. But so I don't really know why I chose the Navy. At that, it was pretty difficult to get in the Marines. Numerous of my friends, people my own age, were on the waiting list to get into the Marines. And possibly I could have got into the Coast Guard, maybe. Not that I probably couldn't have got into the Coast Guard without a high school diploma either. So the Navy would take anybody. the they thrived on 17-year-old high school dropouts.
Well, now, Dave, so you get in the Navy and you took your training at Great Lakes, probably, right?
No, Farragut, Idaho.
Really? Well,
Yeah.
that was a little. Wow, that's quite a ways from. I mean, Great Lakes, isn't that like the big naval training center?
Well, I don't know. I got sworn in Milwaukee somewhere, and they put me on a train and took me to Farragut, Idaho. So that's
But did they? Is that where that big lake is out there?
yeah, Lake Coeur d'Alene.
Oh, sure. You
Yeah,
know.
beautiful lake.
Yeah, yeah. And you got. And what did you train to do?
Um, Nothing in particular.
Well,
Just
what were you assigned to do later than when you? I mean, didn't you go to the South Pacific?
well, yeah. So after boot camp, which in Farragut, Idaho, they I wound up in a torpedo school in San Diego, I believe. After boot camp, I don't remember having any say or about where they sent me after that. I was the Navy's property. So at San Diego, it was the same old thing. I didn't like torpedo school, and apparently a lot of other people didn't either. And we were just uncooperative and this and that. And I remember early one morning, they routed us all out, and I believe there were about 90 of us, and they put us on a destroyer, which I believe was the USS Hickok DD 673, or maybe it was 763, I don't remember for sure. But anyway, they took us out to Honolulu, and I remember watching people get seasick, and I was laughing at them. And I say, I'd say, it's all in your mind. And I found out after a day and a half or so, I found out it wasn't much in the mind, it was mostly in the stomach. So I got seasick as hell. But I had pretty much recovered by the time we got to Honolulu. So we went to they called it a repo depot or replacement depot up in the hills somewhere. We slept in tents, big tents, comfortable tents, and they had a kitchen with decent food and this, that, and the other thing. And so then after a week or so up there, we were interviewed by an officer who apparently asked us what we'd like to do. And I said, well, sir, well, he asked us what kind of a ship we'd like to be on. And he asked me anyway, as I remember it. And I said, well, sir, I don't care what kind of a ship you put me on, but please don't put me on one of those damn destroyers. I don't ever want to see one of those things again. So obviously, they assigned me to a destroyer, the USS Halford DD 480. I never got seasick again, although we were in a lot of pretty rough weather from time to time. So. And I wouldn't have traded that destroyer for a brand new aircraft carrier as far as that went. So from there we went down to the South Pacific. I believe we left Honolulu, I think, right around Christmas Day. It might have been on Christmas Day for all I remember. And we crossed the equator, during which the crossing, we were I forget what they called us, feather merchants or something like that. And anyway, we submitted to some kind of a ceremony wherein the old timers, or an old timer being someone who had been in the Navy 2 weeks longer than I had, where they slapped us on the butt with canvas-covered ropes soaked in water, and it didn't do us much damage. So from there on in, we went down to the Solomon Islands. I was simply a seaman, first class, and my job was whatever the chief boatswain's mate said. So we chipped a lot of paint and painted it all over again with zinc chromate. And but my battle station was gun number 43, which the main battery was a 5-inch 38 caliber. The caliber referred to barrel length. The 5-inch diameter was the diameter of the projectile. So we had 5 of those, and I think maybe 7 40 millimeters, double-barreled 40 millimeters, which my gun was midship on the superstructure deck, and I was the trainer. The pointer sat on the right seat of the gun, and he had a wheel that cranked the barrel up and down in elevation, and I was the trainer. I had my wheel ran it horizontally, but during battle, the gun was slaved to the director, which was up on the second deck somewhere, and was manned by the gunnery officer. And so all the gun crew did was, I sat in my seat, and there was a platform where the other guy sat, and the loaders sat, and there was a conveyor that cranked ammunition up to the loaders, and they'd grab a clip of ammo and shove it into a kind of a funnel-shaped deal and put it down and pull the handle to cock it, and from there on in it would fire automatically. So that was, I remember the number 3 5-inch gun, when it was trained as far forward as it would go, came awful close to us when it fired. So I had, if we had time, we shoved cotton in our ears, of course. But anyway.
They didn't have actual like ear protection.
No. I had been on that destroyer probably a month or two before I was even got a helmet or a life jacket. And they didn't issue me those. I inherited from someone that was getting transferred off. I had the main purpose of the life preserver was to use for a pillow in a bed when we were confined to the guns for a long time. So the life preserver that I inherited was pretty well soaked in grease and oil and dirt and this and that, and if I had jumped overboard with it, I probably would have gone right straight to the bottom. And so the Navy in that respect, well, we were expendable. They had practically an endless supply of 17-year-old high school dropouts like me, so they didn't have to take all that good care of us. They fed us. But mainly what we did, we were based at a place called, I'm pretty sure it was Florida Island, which was across the straits from Guadalcanal. And we went to a place called Purvis Bay, if I remember correctly, Purvis Bay. And that was where we got our provisions and our ammo, and then we would go up to the northern Solomons every afternoon, and we would bombard Japanese emplacements, gun emplacements, and occasionally we would get close enough into shore where they would find targets for us for the 40 millimeter guns. And even on occasion when we got in real close, the 20 millimeters, we had, I think, 7 20 millimeter guns. I think the first time I saw a dog fight was when we invaded Green Island, and there were several P-40s, Curtiss P-40s, which were not considered the best airplane about, but they were dogfighting with a couple of Zeros, which was supposedly a very good fighter. And but as I remember it, the P-40s shot down the Zeros. So they were a better airplane than they were given credit for. So anyway, war stories, and I don't even have any very good war stories. It was.
Dave, I'll be the judge of that. No, that's I think what's fun about these interviews, and this you're the first one I've done like this. I mean, of course, I did a lot as a freelancer, and working for big companies and all of that.
Yeah.
But this is the first time I've done an interview with just somebody who has led an interesting life, and of course, most lives are pretty interesting if you ask questions about it. And I'm finding everything you're saying fascinating. Let me ask you then. So you're in the South Pacific. Were you there when the war ended, or had you already been shipped back to the States?
No, I was there when the war ended, when the atom bombs were dropped.
What was the reaction among the crew to that news? That brand new technology. Presumably, you didn't know anything about it, right? At the
No,
time?
we didn't know anything at all about it. We didn't.
What did they tell you, Dave?
Well, they had a newsletter that they put on the bulletin board every once in a while, and I think that we were notified that the atom bombs had been dropped shortly after they were dropped. So we didn't have enough information or didn't knowledge of anything to have any great opinions on it. And we said, so they dropped an atom bomb. What the hell is an atom bomb? So
did they explain it to you?
No.
I mean, but were you aware how many people were killed and how much damage was done?
Not immediately were we. I don't know exactly how soon after the atom bomb was dropped we got back to Honolulu or San Diego or somewhere, and probably had access to newspapers and news broadcasts, this and that. So we didn't know much about it.
Okay, so Dave, now you get out of the service, right? The war ends, you're out of the service. And I know you then, is that when you got your high school diploma and decided to go to flight school?
Yeah.
And what drove you to that?
Well, I was always airplane crazy. All kids of my age were airplane crazy, so I always wanted to learn to fly. So when I got out of the Navy, I went to the local airport, and I had a little bit of money, a couple of $100, and I walked up to the counter where there was a cute little blonde girl behind the counter. Her name was, I can't remember her name now, but I said, I've got a few $100 and I want to learn to fly. And she says, well, you don't need any money. And I said, what? I didn't have any idea about the GI Bill up to that point. So she said, no, you don't need any money. You could learn to fly here. So I signed up for flying lessons, and the GI Bill paid for it.
What did you do during that time to make a living?
Oh, I worked in various machine shops. Mostly.
And then so you took flying lessons, and what kinds of planes were you flying in to learn?
J3 Cubs, mainly.
What is that?
Well, it's that you'd know one if you saw one, probably. A little yellow, high wing, strut braced, fixed landing gear. You know, they were most of them were yellow, and then I also flew Luscombs and Stinsons and Taylor Crafts and the whole works, the stratum of light planes. And
did you consider yourself to be kind of a natural when it came to learning how to fly? Did you take to it pretty quickly?
not in the least. I had a hell of a time. My flight instructor went nuts. he guy by the name of John Boomsma, and he was a local boy, but he'd been in the Army Air Force. So he about gave up on me. I couldn't get the stick back on landing. No. And anyway, that's a pretty normal sort of thing. So eventually I got the hang of it.
How did you feel when you did your first solo flight without an instructor aboard?
Oh, well, that was quite a thrill. Yeah, I remember the day Johnny climbed out of the airplane and said, well, take it away, take it around. So I'll be standing here by the runway and make 3 takeoffs and landings. So that was that. I survived 3 takeoffs and landings, and then I got my private pilot's license and got a few other ratings, multi-engine rating, and if I'd been smarter, I would have got the instrument rating first before the multi-engine rating, because most airlines wouldn't hire you without the instrument rating. But I wasn't looking for an airline job anyway. I never considered that I would be able to get an airline job. The way that happened is there were a couple of guys that owned a twin Cessna, a double-breasted Cub, it was known as, Cessna UC-78, or the military designation, and there were a couple of guys that owned one from Chicago area, and they had relatives apparently in Racine, and they would come in occasionally, and I worked as a line boy along with, and I would gas up their airplane, and the one guy's name was Barney Baxter, and the other guy's name, boy, I can't think of it. But anyway, they told me that Barney Baxter was a captain on Capitol Airlines, and the other guy was a co-pilot, and they informed me that Capitol was maybe hiring. I must have had my instrument rating by that time. And so they told me, they gave me the chief pilot's phone number or something like that. So I called them, and they said that, well, they had hired their quota for a while, and they weren't, but they'd let me know. So after a few weeks or So they called me back and told me there'd be a ticket for me at the ticket counter at the Midway Airport, and I scrambled to get a ride to Midway Airport, and so I got on a DC-4 and flew to Washington, D.C., where I got hired. So and there were 4 or 5 other people that were in practically the very same situation. They were maybe high school dropouts like me, some of them. They're all dead now. And so that's, so 37 years later, I retired from United Airlines. So in 1961, Capitol Airlines merged with United Airlines. So that's
Dave,
how.
you had been flying. When did you start with Capitol? What year?
1949.
And by then, did you have your high school diploma?
Yeah, yes.
And you got that through like a GED type program?
Well, yeah, it was a GED diploma. And I think I went to Washington Park High School to see about getting a high school diploma. And so they said, oh, well, there's a test you can take. And I took it with 3 or 4 other people, I think, and everybody passed, I'm sure. It was such an easy test that nobody could flunk it. So then I got a diploma.
Huh. Boy, it's not that easy today, I don't think. I don't know though. I did get through high school, so I'm not sure what GEDs are like. So you started flying for Capitol, and back in '49. What type of plane were you flying for Capitol?
Well, DC-3s to begin with, and shortly thereafter, DC-4s.
And Dave, you were the co-pilot at the outset?
Yes,
Co-pilot.
I was a co-pilot for 6 years.
And as a co-pilot, what would you do?
Well, we had certain procedures to go through and checklists you could read, and basically you did what the captain wanted you to do.
And how many passengers did that plane hold?
I think the DC-3 held about 24, and the DC-4 held about 45 or so. And then later on we got Vickers Viscounts. Those were the first turbine-powered airplanes, and they were British, of course. And later on, we got a few Constellations, and I got checked out as captain after, like I say, after about 6 years, and so I started flying the DC-3 as captain. And then shortly, not too long thereafter, the DC-4, and then not too long after that, the Viscount. So,
did you notice differences from plane to plane as you went along?
oh well, yeah, the DC-3 was a twin-engine airplane, and the DC-4 was a 4-engine airplane.
These are all propellers.
Yes. And even the Viscount was propeller driven also, but it was turbine engine. The turbines drove the propellers. So we had quite a few accidents with the Viscounts. Well,
you personally, or your fellow pilots and so on?
no, not me personally. So most of them were total fatalities. So
I wasn't sure, Dave. Who knows, huh? Well, I'm glad you survived it. I mean, you didn't have any problems. What made it different for you? Was it just plain old luck? Or did you have special skills, or?
I don't believe I was any more skilled than the average captain or co-pilot. But I was in the right place at the right time most of the time.
Were some of these attributed to like mechanical failures or problems, or?
Well, one of the first accidents we had with the Viscount was they encountered a flock of swans. I don't know how they do, but they hit a swan directly. It impacted directly on the horizontal stabilizer. And the Viscount was built according to a different philosophy. It, if that particular swan had hit the horizontal stabilizer on a DC-3 or a DC-4 or a DC-6, it would have caused a slight dent, and at our next maintenance stop, the mechanics would have drawn an orange line around the impact area, and at the next at the next inspection, at a spot where it would have kept right on flying. But the Viscount was a kind of a stressed skin, hollow. And so the swan, it penetrated the outer shell, and it opened up in the slipstream and just came apart. And without the horizontal stabilizer, it just tumbled. And it killed everybody on board. Well, like I say, that would have happened with any United States-built airplane, anything, a DC-3, DC-4, Constellation, DC-6, or anything. It would have been a minor event. It wouldn't even have had to have immediate repair. It could have been put off until it got to one of the scheduled maintenance scheduling, you know.
Did it make you nervous to fly that particular plane after the accident?
No, not in particular. Then they had another one, another Viscount, I guess came apart in severe turbulence. And that was total fatality, of course. And another one dove into the ground on short final approach to Saginaw, I think it was. It had some ice on it. And if they had known, if we had got better training, they would have known that it would, with ice on the airframe, they would have refrained from putting down the flaps, at least the final increment of the flaps, because when they put down the final increment of flaps, it kind of blanked out the horizontal stabilizer. And so that's, so what was the other one? And then another one, the captain was Ali Sabatki, I remember that. They were crossing somewhere south of Pittsburgh, and they got a fire. They had some dangerous cargo in the belly pit. And they had a fire that they couldn't put out, and they were over such rough terrain that they delayed landing for a while they were looking for a spot where they could put her down. And I think either either they died from the fumes from the fire, or it destroyed the airframe beyond control, and so they dove into the woods of West Virginia somewhere. No, that was, I think we lost 5 in various types of accidents. And so the industry as a whole, you could count, almost every year, you could count on 3 very serious accidents, regardless of type of aircraft. So there were mid-air collisions. Oh yeah, one of the Viscounts was had a mid-air collision. It was a National Guard jet that had taken off from somewhere and was climbing out in a steep climb, and he slammed right into the Viscount, so that did for that. I don't think the guy in the fighter made it out either. I don't remember. I'm not sure. He might have been able to bail out. I'm not sure. But as far as the Viscount was, that did it.
Dave, when did you start flying jets?
My first jet was the Boeing 727, which I was already flying captain at that time, but not on the jet. So I had to go to Denver for training, and so that I can't hardly remember what year that was. It was obviously later than '61, because that was the time of the merger, and we never had any jets on Capitol until much later. So I guess I was in school for 7 or 8 weeks on the 727. So then later on I flew the Boeing 720s, and then the Douglas DC-8s, and then the Boeing 747. That's where I retired off of the Boeing 747.
What was, when you started flying the jets, Dave? What did you think of the difference between the jets and the prop?
Oh God, there was a big difference. I'd already been flying DC-6s, and the 727 climbed at an airspeed that was greater than the cruising speed of a DC-6. So there was a lot of difference, but there wasn't any big, in flying the jets, it was no big deal, except that there was a FAA guy, never knew his real name, but we called him Joe Z. And he was, he must have cost United millions of dollars, because before we could take the flight training in the 727 or any other jet, we had to go through ground school. We had to pass ground school. In the culmination of the ground school was a rather comprehensive oral examination conducted by the FAA representative, who in this case was this guy Joe Z. So we viewed that oral examination with great trepidation, because the guy could ask you any question he wanted. He was a law unto himself. So the day I was scheduled for my oral, he had flunked 13 consecutive applicants. So I approached that oral exam with a great deal of apprehension. But for some reason or other, and some of those 13 guys who had failed him, I considered to be much smarter than I was. So for some reason or other, he passed me. Maybe it's because he decided 13 was enough, and he might lose his job if he flunked many more guys. So then I got the same guy for my flight check. So that, and it's a similar story. He had flunked all kinds of previous applicants for the flight check, and I passed. I don't recall. There was a flight standards man who was a captain on United, and he rode along on my check ride. And along the top somewhere, Joe said, let's do a holding pattern at such and such a radio off of such and such a Omni station, and we'll do it with a DME, distance measuring equipment. We'll with a such and such a distance, beginning the pattern and out to such and such a distance. Well, it was a very unusual request. So the standards guy, he couldn't comprehend what I was doing. And he said, Nelson, what are you doing? And this Joe Z says to the standards guy, he's doing exactly what I told him to do. Oh, so they two got in an argument. So I just sit back and let them argue. So anyway, I passed the check ride. And the same Joe Z and the same standards guy, I think we had to do a walk around before we took the ride in the airplane. We did this at an airplane, not a simulator. So Joe Z, this guy, there were all kinds of inlets and outlets and holes of various kinds in the airplane, in the 747. I mean, holes, not holes that were accidentally holes that were there for a reason. And he was a bug on that particular knowledge. And I thought, my God, I don't know all those damn holes. What's he's going to ask me this and that and the other thing? So he and the standards guy, as we were approaching the airplane, they got in an argument. So I said, well, let them argue. So I climbed on board the airplane, strapped myself into the captain's seat. And I said, if they want to argue about it, if they want to get me out of here, they can tell me to come back down out of the airplane. But anyway, the standards guy and Joe Z both got on the airplane then, and they were still arguing. So we ran the checklists and started the engines and got in the air. And Joe said a very complimentary thing about me. He turned to the standards guy and he said, well, at last you brought me someone who knows how to fly. I didn't know how to fly any better than anybody else. But anyway, I passed the ride and went down to the hotel and probably had a few. Maybe more than a few.
Now, Dave, when you the biggest plane you flew was the 747, right?
Yeah.
Ultimately. I mean, what was that like when you first started flying that big, giant plane?
Well, it wasn't all that, other than the size, it wasn't all that different than I'd flown the two Boeings previous to it, and a lot of the systems were similar to the 727 and the 720. But then after the 720, I flew the DC-8, and that was Douglas and Lockheed, or Douglas and Boeing, were two different airplanes. You know, there was a lot of difference between a DC-8 and a 747, but there were a lot of things were the same also. So I used to tell people, if you can fly a J3 Cub, you can fly anything, you know. And that was more or less true.
I think that's fascinating, because I remember the first time I flew on a 747 as a passenger, you know, and I'll never forget this. I flew from Chicago to Miami, Miami to Sao Paulo, Brazil, 747.
That wasn't United, was it?
No,
No.
but it was
Yeah.
Varig. It was the Brazilian airline that flew.
Yeah, Varig.
Varig.
Yeah,
And
I remember
so,
Varig.
But I remember, you know, I was in business class because I was flying for a client. You know, I didn't have that kind of money otherwise, and I'm in this gigantic airplane, and I always remember it. It just was so honking big compared to any plane I'd been in. And I remember thinking, how is this going to get off the ground, you know? And then it started.
And as big as it was, you flew it with your fingertips.
That, Dave, I mean, it just seemed to me just so extraordinary that absolutely gigantic plane could get airborne. And yet, just like you say, it took off very smoothly.
Yep.
It was in the air. It didn't make all that much noise. I mean, it wasn't uncomfortable in any way.
It wasn't. It was a wonderful airplane. The redundancy of systems, almost anything. If you had any, I never had an emergency, but any kind of a mishap or anything that failed. It wasn't, you know, it wasn't any big deal because there were, you could, if you had a flap failure, you could operate it with the flaps were hydraulic, as most things were on the airplane. But if you had anything go wrong with the flap system, it was backed up with an electric flap actuators. So it was a wonderful airplane.
Did you, Dave? You know, in the quarters that you had in the captain's area, where you actually were at the controls, did you have like special, like a kitchen for yourself and the other crew members and bathrooms and all that stuff?
No.
You just used what everybody else used.
Yeah.
All the passengers.
Yeah. If we needed toilet facilities, we had to go back to the later models. I understand did have. They did have a crew lavatory, but I only flew the old originals. They were getting the more advanced models just as I had to retire, so I never got to fly those.
Didn't the first ones, Dave, the 747s, didn't they actually have like a bar area, like on the upper level?
Well, yeah.
Where you could stand around in like a bar?
Yeah, they did have.
Did you ever walk back there and just kind of introduce yourself?
No.
Never happened.
No. A lot of captains did.
Did you, did you ever have any passengers, like nowadays it seems regularly you read about these passengers
Oh, yeah.
who are creepy, who do all these nutty things. Did you have passengers like that?
Very seldom. I can only think of one or two instances where we had someone that maybe got a little too much alcohol or something. But yeah, most of the problem now is people object to wearing masks.
But you didn't have so much of that. Like when I think of my first flight, it was from O'Hare to my first, jet flight. You know, it was from O'Hare to New York, and I was on American Airlines flying standby, and you know, it was kind of fancy. It was probably 67, I guess it was, or 66. I can't remember exactly, but I mean, people dressed up.
Oh yeah.
And the plane was I think at most half full. You know, it just weren't that many people on the plane, and for all the early years I flew, there weren't that many people on the plane.
Yeah.
Rarely did I see a full plane. You know.
Nowadays they're all. My son says he almost every trip he flies is fully loaded.
Well, that isn't that kind of because of deregulation, when they deregulated the industry and they.
Well, that yeah, that probably, but that happened quite a few years ago.
Yeah, that wasn't it in the 80s, probably, or late 70s when they deregulated?
Yeah, it was probably, yeah, sometime in the 80s.
The reason I have a clue, Dave, is I did some work for Midwest Express, you know, as a writer-producer. And I remember that was something that that was part of the impetus to form Midwest Express. You know,
now the first airline my youngest son, Ken, flew for was an offspring of Midwest Express. It was Skyway Airlines.
I'm familiar with it, yeah.
Yeah, my son Ken flew for them for I think 10 years, almost 10 years. And he was a captain for most of that time. So he had flown previously on a I forget what they call them, the regional airline, regional jet airline. But anyway, well, more questions?
Yeah. Are you still willing?
Well, sure.
Okay, well, I just find all this information about, you know, aviation fascinating, really, and I think other people will too. But I also want to talk with you about your atheism, which is unusual. You know, not for people we know, because most people we know are rational and so on.
Yeah.
But growing up when you did in the 30s, you know, when did you come to kind of the atheistic point of view?
Well, that's a good, interesting question. I always knew that I was a little different. My younger brother and my three older sisters, we all went to Trinity Methodist Sunday school. I went to Sunday school till I was 12 years old, and I was catechized and confirmed, and but I never believed any of it. But I knew I was different, but I didn't know that there was a name for what I was. You know, I didn't find that out until at the age of 12. I could remember it almost exactly that time. At the age of 12, I ran across a publication. It was a what's the word I'm searching for? But I sent away for this publication because like I say, I was making big money in the scrap business, and so in due time, I like to think that it only cost 10 cents, but I think it must have cost more than that. It was about, because seems to me it was about 12 or 16 pages thick. So in due time, after sending in my money, I get this mailing tube with this publication, and I kind of think that it was a publication of the Police Gazette, but I'm not sure at all. about that. But anyway, that contained a lot of things that I had never read before, including what was the Ballad of Reading Jail, and the shooting of Dan McGrew, and maybe the creation of Sam McGee, in the Edward Fitzgerald version of the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam. But the thing that really caught my attention was the Percy, the poet.
Percy Shelley?
Percy Shelley. His essay, The Necessity of Atheism, which really, well, all of which I read, you know, and I thought, well, now I know what to call myself. I'm an atheist. So, been one ever since. And so, like I said, I was 12 years old at that time, and I kept that publication real close until I joined the Navy when I was 17. And then all of my possessions had disappeared by the time I got out of the Navy and got back home. So for some years, I really searched. There was a time when I would have paid $1,000 for a copy of that publication, but I never managed to find one. The reason I think it was a publication of the Police Gazette was I had this brother-in-law who was my half-sister's husband, and they lived not too far from where I lived at the time. I lived on Jones Street, and they lived just a couple blocks away, and he was a randy sort of a guy. I think he propositioned every woman he ever met. My other sisters told me he propositioned all of them. And I used to go to his house because there I would find reading matter that my mother would by no means have even allowed into the house. She would have gathered it all up and thrown it in the trash. So I think I probably found that that publication somewhere in one of the magazines I read at my brother-in-law's house. So that's when I became. So, like I say, Percy Shelley led me on the right track, and I've listened to the Necessity of Atheism. I've got it on my on my Alexa now, and it's an Audible book, and I've reviewed it several times since then, and I really don't understand it all that well, and I'm quite sure I didn't understand it at that time, but it made enough of an impression on me. What little bit I did understand made a great impression.
I know, from knowing you, Dave, that you had an interest also in astronomy. You had a telescope, and when did your interest in science and astronomy and all that start?
Well, probably my interest in science started in my days when I hid out in the public library, because I read some H.G. Wells and various other authors, and I guess I was always more or less interested in science and astronomy, and I was later on, of course, I subscribed to Astronomy Magazine and Skeptic Magazine and Free Inquiry and lots of publications. But astronomy, I'm pretty sure, you know, one place where I lived, we had a garage, and I could get up on the roof of the garage quite easily. Uh, and I remember, this would have been when I was about 12 years old too. I remember climbing up onto the garage roof and laying on my back and just looking at the night sky and trying to figure out what it all meant. You know, back then, you probably remember some of this too, but the sky was so clear. Nowadays, if I could climb up onto the same roof and look at that same sky, I probably wouldn't even be able to see any stars. The atmosphere has become so polluted in that time that I wouldn't even be able to see any. I can't see any stars from my balcony. Well, I sold my telescope shortly before we moved in here. It was a 5-inch Star Master made by an engineer in Kansas, I think, somewhere. I can't quite remember the guy's name, but it was known as the Oak Classic Star Master scope, and it was a Newtonian reflector on a Dobsonian mount and a 5-inch scope. And I had that for several years while we still lived on Chicory Road. And I had it long enough so that the trees in my driveway had grown enough so that they were obstructing my vision. And I've often thought of getting another telescope, but my vision is so restricted by trees which are too close to my balcony, and there's a roof over my balcony, and so I've even thought about maybe getting a pad laid in the park out that's just south of here, and getting another telescope that I could keep inside but take out when I wanted to do some sky dating. You still do the sidewalk astronomy thing?
When I do the sidewalk astronomy, it's very close quarters. You know, I always have people kind of right up near me.
Uh-huh.
I'm not as worried about getting it myself as somehow passing it on to somebody. You know, I get people of all ages, I get kids. I don't know, it makes me nervous, you know, and inevitably it's close proximity because I'm showing them how to look through the eyepiece, and for a lot of people, that's a brand new experience.
What kind of scope have you got now?
Well, I've got a beautiful scope. I've got an 8-inch Celestron Nexstar 8. It's computer controlled. It's got, this is a word I don't use often, but it's exquisite optics. Everything about it is just first rate. And I did have a Meade scope, you know, originally. I had a 10-inch Meade, Schmidt Cassegrain, beautiful scope too, but the optics were not, in my opinion, were not as good as the Celestron scope. The mirrors and the lenses and all of it are just top grade, you know.
I would really love to have something like that, and I can afford it. I can afford anything I want.
But Dave, what about your macular?
Well, yeah, that I don't know. Yeah.
I mean, if you have trouble looking at a computer screen, I don't know how you could look through a telescope.
Yeah, I really didn't think of that until you mentioned it just now. Yeah, but how would I? Yeah.
You know, it's interesting with sidewalk astronomy. I mean, it's so much fun to do, you know. But of course, the bugaboo is the weather in Wisconsin, you know, which is the second most cloudy in America, the Midwest here. Most cloudy is the Northwest, you know, Washington State, Oregon, and so on. You know, what do they call it? Temperate rainforest is what they have there, and it rains a lot. but we get a lot of cloudy weather here too.
Yep, we sure do.
And it's hard to then, as a consequence, it's difficult to plan an event because you just don't know. And the Brookfield Library, where I originally did the psychoastronomy, they were absolutely adamant that I had to plan it. I had to come up with a list of, dates that we were going to shoot for, and one after another, practically month by month. I did like a monthly thing. They were canceled because of clouds. And I told him, I said, this isn't working. How about if we just, the day of, we've got something decent to look at. Well, there's always something great in the sky to look at. But, something that we can see easily with the scope, like the moon or Jupiter or Saturn or Mars or something like that. The day of, we get a clear day. I'll contact you early in the morning. You can put up a flyer, sidewalk astronomy tonight, with the object.
Well, you asked me where I got my interest in science. One of my favorite writers, you have probably heard of him. He was I subscribed to Scientific American for quite a few years, and he was the editor of their mathematical games section.
Martin Gardner?
Yeah, Martin Gardner.
Yes.
And at his level, what passed for mathematical games was, to them it was tic-tac-toe, but to me it was quantum physics.
Yes.
Yeah, Martin Gardner is a wonderful writer.
Brilliant guy.
I'm sure he's no longer living.
No, he's deceased.
Yeah.
I remember that. He was with Skeptical Inquirer and Free Inquiry for a long time, after Scientific American, and wrote quite a few articles for them. But anyway, getting back, so the Brookfield Library wouldn't do it, so I told them, well, if, in that case, I'm going to try to find another library. So I went to Elm Grove, and they said, sure, that's fine with us. Ever since then, it's been in Elm Grove, and it's been great. But the problem is, of course, having the time and all that, and of course now with COVID. But I got to tell you, Dave, one of the favorite things I showed people, and I always tell people this, it was the sun, because of the sunspots. And you've heard of the 11-year cycle. You go from solar minimum to solar maximum, and at minimum there are no sunspots, none. And at maximum there's usually 2 or 3 visible at any time. And when the sunspots are visible, each sunspot, and you might have seen them once or twice in your time, each sunspot, even the small ones, are the size of the Earth. And so I'm able to tell people that. And I have people looking, and I tell them interesting things about sunspots. And the first one is most of them are the size of the Earth. And for a lot of people, it's a visceral thing, and it's the first time they've ever really understood just how big the sun is. And I frequently would tell people, the sun is 93 million miles away. The moon's like 250,000 miles away. And yet they look about the same size in the sky. Yeah. And it's that coincidence of that same size that permits our eclipses.
Yeah.
It's just a chance sort of thing, and it gives us this magnificent phenomenon called the eclipse. I had one lady in particular. I think I was still doing it at the Brookfield Library. I started doing this about 20 years ago. And I was telling her these kinds of things. Well, each sunspot's bigger than the Earth, and she's taking it in, and then she turns to me as she's going to go, and she says, "I don't care. The Earth was still created first."
Oh yeah.
Every once in a while I get one of these fundy types like
oh
that.
Yeah, I would think so.
And I don't, Dave. I'm there I'm there with my own reasons, and I don't get into any kind of debate about such things. You and I both are at a point where we don't have to make money anymore, right? We don't have to work for a living anymore.
No.
I think I work all the time because I'm still writing and doing all that stuff. But we're fortunate just to be able to do what we like, and that's what I do. I do what I like.
Yeah.
Create these things, and you know, I try to tell interesting stories. And I always figure if something clicks, if something I've done clicks, then people will be exposed to everything else.
Yeah.
So, but until then, I don't worry about it that much because I enjoy the process. You know, I've enjoyed immensely having this conversation with you, and of course, you and I have been friends for quite a while. You know.
Yeah.
Starting with Atheist Chat, and that, you know, Dave, that, you know, it's amazing, but that was back when Clinton was president, I think.
That was 30 years ago.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That was more fun. That and there's nothing like that web chat broadcasting system today, I don't think. And actually, earlier in the day, I queried my Alexa and said, Alexa, find an atheist chat room for me, and no response. The closest we can come to it now is the Thinking Atheist with what's his name?
That Matt guy? Thinking Atheist. I'm not sure what that would be.
Seth Andrews.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Or the Friendly Atheist with Hemet Meta. And I don't listen to Matt Dillahunty anymore, the Atheist Experience, because I watched Matt Dillahunty go downhill from a really good interviewer and this and that to an arrogant, foul-mouthed bully. Is the nearest thing I could come up with. But anyway, let's terminate for now.
Okay, Dave, it's been really a lot of fun.
Yeah, it has been.
I hope you enjoyed it too. And
yeah, I did.
oh, good, good. And you know, this technology, Dave, is